The night everything broke. Hit that subscribe button before the lights go out, because what you're about to hear is the kind of truth most prisons wish stayed buried. Smoke still hung in the air as the last siren echoed across the Colorado mountains. Red and blue lights washed over the fields in pulsing waves, cutting through the darkness like rapid-fire warnings. The date was written later in reports, but for the officers standing outside the United States Penitentiary in Marion, it was remembered simply as the night control died. Just after 2 a.m., 2 correctional officers had been attacked inside the prison's most secure unit. What should have been an uneventful shift turned into a chain of events that no one on staff forgot. 1 minute, the radios crackled with routine check-ins. The next, they exploded with hollow voices shouting for backup, drowning in panic. It was the kind of moment that made every warden in the country fear what could come next. When emergency teams rushed toward the cell block, they found doors jammed, radios scrambled, and a silence so unnatural that even seasoned officers hesitated before stepping in. Every inmate was supposed to be behind a reinforced steel door. Every movement was meant to be monitored. Yet somehow, the entire block looked as if someone had switched the rules of the prison in the middle of the night. The incident shook the Bureau of Prisons, but the real unraveling had begun long before that night. The violence at Marion wasn't random. It was the result of months of tension, routines disrupted, privileges restricted, and warnings ignored. Several inmates had been transferred from other facilities across the country. Each had their own history, but all came with the same label: individuals who could not be safely managed in any standard high-security prison. One of them was a man known simply by his last name, Dawson. No dramatic legends surrounded him, no exaggerated tales whispered in prison yards. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He was patient. Too patient. Investigators would later describe him as a man who treated every hallway like a chessboard. If conflict erupted around him, Dawson always seemed to be standing 2 steps away, watching, calculating. Another inmate, Riley, was nearly the opposite: volatile, unpredictable, the kind of person who acted first and thought later. But what made Riley dangerous wasn't his aggression. It was who listened to him. He had a way of pulling others into his orbit, convincing them that nothing inside the prison was permanent, not the rules, not the routines, not even the walls. Officers had reported unusual behavior in the days leading up to the incident. Inmates communicating without speaking, passing small notes through impossible gaps, and coordinating movements without being seen together. Security staff argued about what it meant. Some said it was typical prison politics. Others believed something larger was building. But by the time the truth revealed itself, it was too late. On the night of the attack, surveillance cameras in the block experienced unexplained disruptions. Not total failure, just seconds at a time, enough for movements to go unnoticed. Doors that should have been mechanically sealed showed signs of tampering. Investigators later realized the timing wasn't coincidental. It was coordinated, almost surgical. Special teams were deployed to restore control, moving cell by cell through the block. Inmates were ordered to step away from their doors. Most complied immediately. But there was one cell that drew unusual attention: Cell 213. The door was closed, but something felt off. Inside, Dawson sat at his desk, calm as winter. He didn't look up when officers entered. He didn't ask questions. He simply folded a sheet of paper he had been writing on and placed it neatly on the corner of his bed. A small gesture, innocent even. But officers who were there later said it felt like he was finishing a letter he had started weeks earlier, like everything had led to that moment. The paper was confiscated. What was written on it changed the entire direction of the investigation. The note wasn't a confession. It wasn't a threat. It was a list. Dates. Times. Details of movements inside multiple federal prisons over several years. Not coded messages. Clear, precise, and disturbingly accurate. The kind of information that should only be known by people with access to high-level security systems. How had Dawson obtained it? More importantly, why was he keeping it? Before investigators could question him, something unexpected happened. Riley disappeared. Not escaped, he was still inside the facility, but he slipped into a part of the prison no inmate should have been able to enter. Every camera angle missed him. Every sensor failed to register him. It was as if someone had erased him from the grid. By morning, the Bureau of Prisons had no choice but to admit the truth. The federal system had vulnerabilities no one anticipated. Not just physical ones, structural ones, organizational ones, strategic ones. 3 months later, a new directive was drafted. A facility unlike anything the United States had ever attempted. A place designed not just to hold inmates, but to control every movement, every second, every breath. A place built for people like Dawson and Riley. A place called ADX Florence. But what investigators discovered in the basement of Marion, locked behind a file cabinet that hadn't been opened in years, was something no one expected. And it changed everything. The blueprint buried in Marion. Morning came slowly to Marion, as if the sun itself hesitated to shine on a place that had spent the night drowning in alarms. The administrative wing was nearly silent, except for the soft shuffle of boots on old linoleum and the low murmurs of officers who hadn't slept since the crisis began. Warden Mitchell stood in his office, motionless, staring at a wall filled with incident maps and red markers. His eyes traced every line, every circle, every note scrawled in the frantic handwriting of tired investigators. But nothing made sense.
Not yet.
Every angle pointed to one conclusion. The attack was coordinated. But by whom? And for what? Just after 9 a.m., 2 internal affairs officers, Ramirez and Douglas, arrived with the file that changed everything. They slammed a thick cabinet drawer open in the lower storage room, expecting old reports and outdated disciplinary notices. Instead, wedged behind a rusted metal divider, they found a sealed envelope marked with a code none of them recognized. No name, no date. Just a single word stamped in fading ink. Forward. Inside was a folder containing architectural sketches, handwritten memos, and reports from over a decade earlier. Documents detailing structural weaknesses in multiple federal prisons across the country. The envelope looked untouched. Dust coated every edge. It was as if someone had hidden it there intentionally, waiting for the right moment for it to be found. Or the wrong moment. One of the memos stood out immediately. It was addressed to a former Bureau of Prisons director and referenced a proposed facility, one designed to isolate inmates who posed systemic threats beyond physical violence. Individuals capable of orchestrating coordinated actions, even from solitary confinement. Individuals who found ways to manipulate staff, communication systems, or other inmates with alarming efficiency. The proposed name for that facility: Administrative Maximum Unit, Southwest Division.
ADX.
Years before it existed. Ramirez looked at Douglas, both realizing the significance. This wasn't a reaction, she said quietly. This was a warning. But the true shock came next. At the bottom of the folder was a short, typed report summarizing incidents from different prisons: Tucson, Leavenworth, Atlanta. Each case involved small breaches, odd communication disruptions, or coordinated inmate behavior that couldn't be explained by chance. Paperclipped to the report was a list of names, including Dawson, not as an inmate, as a subject of interest. And Riley's name wasn't there because he hadn't been incarcerated yet. But several individuals Riley had associated with over the years were listed. Douglas exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. This has to go to the warden. But Ramirez wasn't looking at the list anymore. She was staring at a handwritten annotation on the final page. If the system doesn't adapt, these individuals will eventually force adaptation. She knew instantly who had written it. The handwriting matched a note they'd collected that morning. Dawson's note. The interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. Dawson sat with his hands folded, relaxed, as if he'd been waiting for someone to bring these documents to him. Mitchell entered the room with the folder under his arm, his jaw clenched. "You knew this," Mitchell said, dropping the papers onto the table. "You knew it existed." Dawson didn't look surprised. He simply raised his eyes. "Warden," he said calmly, "you're assuming I went looking for this information. But the truth is, the system delivers what I need. Eventually." Mitchell leaned forward. "Where is Riley?" Dawson's expression didn't change. "Riley is where someone wanted him to be." Mitchell slammed his hand on the table. This isn't a game. Dawson finally blinked, slowly, deliberately. Oh, it's not a game. Not anymore. His voice dropped lower. You built these prisons believing you understood danger. But danger isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It sits in corners you never check. Mitchell's stomach twisted, but before he could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. Officers sprinted down the hallway. Radios exploded with chatter. A voice finally broke through. "We've found him. Riley is in the service tunnels." Mitchell left the room instantly. The service tunnels beneath Marion were narrow, cold, and barely illuminated by flickering maintenance bulbs. Only authorized staff were supposed to know about the passages. Yet somehow Riley was there. Moving fast. Too fast. Officers chased him through a maze of pipes and concrete walls, places even staff rarely accessed. The deeper they went, the more apparent it became that Riley hadn't wandered there by accident. He moved with purpose, navigating turns with familiarity no inmate should have. By the time they trapped him between two dead ends, Riley wasn't fighting. He wasn't panicked. He was holding a small, folded piece of paper, the same size as the note they found in Dawson's cell. "Drop it," an officer commanded. Riley grinned faintly and let the paper fall to the ground. Inside was a simple message. You can build stronger walls, but you cannot stop what you don't understand. Mitchell felt something cold settle in his chest. The two inmates weren't working alone. This was bigger, older, planned long before they arrived at Marion. Whatever was happening inside the federal prison system wasn't just corruption or rebellion. It was evolution. And in the final report written that day, Mitchell included the most chilling line of his career. If these individuals can coordinate from confinement, then no prison in America is capable of containing them yet. 2 months later, construction began on a facility built for one purpose: absolute control. ADX Florence. But the final discovery, the one that explained why these events unfolded, was still waiting, locked in a place no one had checked, hidden in plain sight. The reason ADX had to exist. 2 weeks after the incident at Marion, a winter storm rolled across the Midwest, burying the prison under thick gray skies. Snow piled on the watchtower roofs, muffling the usual clang of gates and echo of boots on concrete. But inside the administrative wing, the atmosphere was anything but quiet. Federal officials had arrived, directors, analysts, and investigators from Washington. They moved through the corridors with a sharp, nervous energy, reviewing reports, interviewing staff, and replaying surveillance footage frame by frame. Everyone hoped for clear answers. Instead, the confusion grew deeper. Every timeline of Dawson and Riley's actions ended in the same impossible conclusion. They should not have been able to do what they did. Yet they did. And then came the breakthrough. At 5:14 p.m., Douglas burst into Warden Mitchell's office, holding an old storage manifest. His face was pale. "Warden, you need to see this." He laid the manifest on the desk. It listed equipment from the old communications center, items that had been replaced years earlier when Marion modernized. Everything was checked off except one. System Relay Unit, Model 7C. Status missing. Mitchell frowned. That doesn't make sense. Those units were decommissioned. Not all of them, Douglas replied. One was supposed to be transferred to secure disposal. It never arrived. The implication hit hard. Someone inside Marion had taken it. Hours later, a search team combed through the deserted areas of the prison and used offices, storage closets, mechanical rooms. Nothing appeared unusual until they reached the old records basement, a room that hadn't been opened in years. The padlock looked undisturbed, but the dust on the floor told a different story. Someone had slipped inside recently. Mitchell stepped in first, shining his flashlight into the darkness. Documents were scattered across metal shelves, outdated inmate files, maintenance logs, decades-old administrative notes. But in the back corner sat a small metal locker. Its door hung slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside was the missing equipment. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Next to it sat a worn binder, edges frayed, labeled in thick marker. Operational assessment, high-risk behavior cases, restricted. Mitchell opened it slowly. The first page was a summary report from 15 years earlier. It detailed a pattern of inmate behavior across multiple facilities, coordinated protests, simultaneous disturbances, and isolated security breaches that occurred too precisely to be coincidence. At the bottom of the page was a name. Dr. Franklin Cade, Behavioral Systems Analysis. Mitchell had heard the name before. Cade was a psychologist who had once worked for the Bureau of Prisons, specializing in inmate communication patterns. He left under quiet circumstances after filing several controversial reports. Douglas flipped to the next section. What they saw explained everything. Cade theorized that small groups of inmates, spread across different prisons, were developing ways to communicate indirectly. Not through letters, not through phones, but through predictable patterns in behavior, coded phrases, or exploiting weaknesses in outdated internal relay systems. He warned that certain individuals were capable of orchestrating events far beyond ordinary prison conflict. And on the next page, photographs. Not current ones. Old ones. Mugshots from different prisons. Different years. Different states. But two faces stood out immediately. A younger Dawson.
And a teenage Riley. Not connected then.
Not incarcerated together, but marked as early subjects in Cade's research. A note at the bottom read, "High-risk individuals may adapt faster than the system's ability to contain them. Recommend construction of a facility with total sensory restriction and zero communication pathways." The date on the report was long before Marion's incident. Long before ADX Florence was even proposed. Mitchell exhaled slowly. They weren't the cause. Douglas nodded. They were the evidence. That night, Mitchell returned to the interrogation room. Dawson sat at the table, hands folded as always, as if he'd been expecting the warden. Mitchell dropped the binder in front of him. "You were being studied long before you arrived here," Mitchell said. "Before Riley. Before any of this." For the first time, Dawson looked slightly amused. "It seems Dr. Cade was paying attention," he said. "Why?" Mitchell demanded. "Why go through all of this? Why push the system to its edge?" Dawson leaned back, the faintest shadow crossing his expression. "You lock people away and believe time will wear them down," he said. "But for some of us, confinement didn't weaken anything. It sharpened it." He tapped the binder gently. "You built prisons to control actions, but you forgot to control influence." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "You manipulated the systems." "No," Dawson replied softly. "We exposed them." The words hung in the room like cold smoke. ADX Florence wasn't created because of us, Dawson continued. It was created because the Bureau finally accepted what it had ignored for decades.
He paused.
Then, quietly, "Some individuals cannot be placed among others without altering everything around them." Mitchell stared at him, seeing not arrogance, but a chilling honesty. "The system needed a new cage," Dawson whispered. "So we showed them why." 1 month later, Dawson and Riley were transferred under heavy security escort to the newly completed Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado. The media never learned the details. Reports cited security concerns, disciplinary escalation, and threats to institutional order. But the real reason, the chain of events stretching back years, remained locked inside internal Bureau files. ADX Florence opened with a mission statement that sounded sterile, clinical, almost bureaucratic. To house the individuals whose behavior threatens the safe, secure, and orderly operation of any federal correctional institution. But behind that statement was a deeper truth. ADX existed because the system met people it could not predict. People it could not negotiate with. People it could not ignore. People like Dawson. People like Riley. And people the Bureau hoped would never appear again. But 3 months after their transfer, in a federal prison hundreds of miles away, a small disturbance occurred. Nothing violent. Nothing obvious. Just a brief camera disruption. A series of lights flickering out for 8 seconds. And 2 inmates standing at their doors at the exact same time, staring down the hallway as if waiting for a signal. The report filed that day was short. But its final line echoed everything the Bureau feared most. Pattern resembles early-stage coordination seen prior to Marian events. The system had adapted. But evolution never stops. And neither did the individuals chasing its weaknesses.